3 questions. There is a teacher in a grade 7 classroom in Singapore who does something at the start of every new unit. She does not announce the unit. She does not project the learning objectives. She does not hand out the schedule. She walks to the wall behind her desk. She has 3 sticky notes in her hand. One is yellow, one is green, one is pink. She writes a single question on each. She pins the yellow one to the wall first, then the green one, then the pink one. She steps back. She turns to the class. She says, "These are our 3 questions for the unit. They will be here every day. Each one is a different kind of question, and each one wants a different kind of thinking. We are not going to answer them in order. We are going to live inside them for the next 3 weeks. The unit is on scarcity in economics." The yellow sticky says, "What does economists mean by opportunity cost?" The green sticky says, "How does scarcity drive human choice?" The pink sticky says, "Is a society morally obliged to allocate resources by need rather than by market?" She lets the room sit with the 3. Then she begins. This chapter is about those 3 colors: the yellow question, the green question, the pink question. They are the 3 kinds of question that drive every concept-based inquiry unit. Most teachers only use one of them: the yellow, the factual one, the kind of question that has a clean, right answer. By the end of this chapter, you will know all 3. You will know what each one is for. You will know how to write your own. And you will never again teach a unit that is built only out of yellow questions. The yellow question, factual. Let me start with the kind of question every teacher already knows. The factual question. A factual question has a single correct answer. It is locked in time. It is locked in topic. The answer can be Googled in 10 seconds. It is the kind of question that fills most textbooks and most worksheets and most quizzes. What is the boiling point of water at sea level? 100 degrees Celsius. There is the answer. There is no other answer. When did the French Revolution begin? 1789. What is the chemical formula for glucose? C6H12O6. Who wrote Hamlet? William Shakespeare. These questions are useful. They build the vocabulary of a discipline. They give students the bricks they need before they can build the wall. Every student needs to know a basic number of facts in any subject. That is true even in concept-based teaching. We do not abandon facts. We just stop treating facts as the destination. The factual question is the floor of the unit. It is not the structure. It is not the roof. It is what you stand on while you build the rest. Use factual questions to do 3 jobs. To activate prior knowledge at the start of a lesson. To check understanding partway through. To make sure students have the technical vocabulary they need to discuss the bigger ideas. Beyond those 3 jobs, the factual question loses its purchase. If your entire unit is built out of factual questions, you have built a quiz, not a unit. Here is the test. If a clever student can answer your question without thinking, without comparing 2 things, without changing their mind, the question is a factual question. The green question, conceptual. Now I want to introduce the question that most teachers underuse. The conceptual question. The green sticky. A conceptual question is timeless. It is not locked in topic. It does not have a single right answer. It has multiple defensible answers. It usually begins with the words how or why. It asks students to make sense of a pattern, not to recall a fact. How does the separation of powers prevent tyranny? That is a conceptual question. There is no one-line answer. To answer it, a student has to think about what tyranny is, how power can be abused, what the function of separated branches is, how each branch checks the others, what happens when one branch breaks the system. They have to reason. They have to use evidence. They have to make a claim. Why do substances change state? Another conceptual question. The answer involves energy, the bonds between molecules, the conditions under which those bonds give way. A student has to construct an explanation. They cannot just retrieve one. How does scarcity drive human choice? The green question from the Singaporean classroom. The student cannot answer this in one line. They have to consider what scarcity is, what choices look like, how a person weighs options when not all options are available, how a society scales those individual choices into collective ones. The question is generative. It produces more questions, which is exactly what good questions should do. Conceptual questions are the spine of the unit. The factual questions are the bricks. The conceptual question is what holds the bricks together. While a student is working on the factual material, the conceptual question is hovering in the air, asking them to make sense of it, to connect it, to fit it into a larger pattern. A conceptual question does not have one right answer. It has better and worse answers. Better answers are those that account for more evidence, that connect more concepts, that survive the test of being applied to a new case. Worse answers are those that ignore inconvenient evidence, that collapse the question into a single fact that cannot be transferred. The trick to writing a conceptual question is to ask yourself this. Could two thoughtful students give very different answers to my question and both be defensible? If yes, you have a conceptual question. If no, you have a factual question. Try writing one yourself before we move on. Take a topic you teach, then write a question about it that starts with how or why, and that requires the student to make sense of a pattern rather than recall a fact. 3 more examples in different subjects so the shape of these questions sinks in. In a primary maths unit on patterns, how does knowing a rule help us predict what comes next? That question opens for the youngest students. It does not have a single right answer. It produces answers about music, about routines, about the school day, about the weather. In a Year 8 literature unit on character motivation, how does a character's past shape the choices they make under pressure? That question opens onto every novel, every play, every short story. It is timeless. It is universal. In a diploma physics unit on motion, why is energy never lost but always transformed? That question opens onto thermodynamics, biology, climate science, design engineering. A 17-year-old will spend years thinking about that question. Notice these questions never close. They keep producing thought. That is what they are for. The pink question. Debatable. Now, the third, sticky. The pink one. The debatable question. A debatable question is provocative. It has no single correct answer. It is evaluative. It asks the student to take a position, defend it, and consider alternatives. It usually begins with the words is, should, to what extent, must, or ought. Is mathematics discovered or invented? That is a debatable question. The greatest mathematicians in history have disagreed about it. There is no consensus. To engage with a question, a student has to think about what mathematics is, what discovery means, what invention means, what counts as evidence for one side or the other. They have to take a position. They have to be willing to be wrong. They have to engage with the strongest version of the other view. Should a government ever suspend rights during a crisis? Debatable. To answer it, a student has to consider what a right is. When a crisis justifies abridging it, who decides what limits should apply? There is no clean answer. The student must reason. Is a society morally obliged to allocate resources by need rather than by market? The pink sticky from Singapore. A question that economists and philosophers have argued about for centuries. A question that opens the gate to political theory, to ethics, to history. A question A teacher can leave on the wall for 3 weeks without it ever becoming boring. Debatable questions are the roof of the unit. They sit on top of the conceptual structure. They are where the unit's deepest thinking happens. They are also where students discover that learning has stakes, that ideas matter, that what they believe will be tested by argument. The trick to writing a debatable question is to ask yourself this: could two reasonable adults disagree about my question? And could each one give a defensible argument for their position? If yes, you have a debatable question. If no, you have a conceptual or factual question in disguise. A debatable question is also the question that most invites the student into the unit as a real thinker. Factual questions ask students to recall. Conceptual questions ask students to explain. Debatable questions ask students to decide, to take a position, to be a participant rather than a spectator. That participation is what we are trying to build. Not because we want students to have opinions about everything. Because the act of taking a defensible position is the act of becoming an educated person. A quick round of practice. Let me run you through a few question pairs so you can hear the difference. Each pair starts with a factual question and then sharpens into a conceptual or a debatable question. Listen for the lift. What are the 3 branches of the United States government? Factual. The answer is in any textbook. How does the separation of branches prevent any single branch from accumulating too much power? Conceptual. There is real thinking required to answer. Should a government ever be permitted to suspend the powers of one branch during a crisis? Debatable. Reasonable people disagree. Now, a maths pair. What is the formula for the area of a circle? Factual. Pi r squared. Why does the area of a circle grow as the square of its radius, even though the radius itself grows linearly? Conceptual. Requires the student to reason about how dimensions scale. Is mathematics discovered or invented by human minds? Debatable. A question that has occupied thinkers for 2,000 years. Now, a music pair. What is a tonic chord? Factual. The first chord of the scale. The home notes chord. How do composers build and release tension through harmony, melody, and rhythm? Conceptual. Requires the student to reason about what tension is and how it is engineered. Is silence a form of music? Debatable. The composer John Cage built his career arguing yes. Others argue no. Both have defensible positions. You can build the same 3 layers for any topic. Take whatever you teach next week. Try writing one of each kind. You will find that the factual question comes easily. The conceptual one takes a minute. The debatable one takes a few minutes more. The time spent is worth it because those questions are what your unit is now built around. The balance of a unit. A good concept-based unit needs all 3 kinds, not in equal amounts, in their right proportions. The factual questions occupy the early stages. They build vocabulary. They give students the raw material. You do not skip them. You just do not stop at them. The conceptual questions sit at the center. They are the spine. They are what most of the unit is for. The students will return to them again and again. They will refine their answers as they collect more evidence. By the end of the unit, their conceptual answer should be deeper than it was at the start. The debatable questions sit at the top. There may only be 1 or 2 in the entire unit. They are not the source of every lesson. They are the question that gives the unit its weight. They are what students go home thinking about. They are what shows up in the final assessment, where a student is asked to take a position and defend it. Think of the proportion as roughly this: 20% factual, 60% conceptual, 20% debatable. That is rough. Different subjects will vary. Mathematics might need more factual scaffolding. Philosophy might lean more on the debatable. History sits in the middle. But every unit needs all three in some proportion. If your unit has no debatable question at all, the unit will lack a center of gravity. The students will not have a reason to care. Add one. Just one is enough. If your unit has no conceptual question, the unit will be a quiz with extra steps. Add one. Make it the spine. If your unit has no factual questions, the unit will float. The students will not have the raw material to think with. Add some. Use them as warm-ups and checks. All three, always, that is the recipe. A worked example, slowly. Let me walk you through writing all three for a single unit. The unit is on tension and resolution in music. Grade 7, 3 weeks. The factual question, something a student can look up. What is a tonic chord? What is a dominant chord? What does it mean for a chord progression to resolve? These are factual. They give students the technical vocabulary. They go on a vocabulary slide. They are not the heart of the unit. The conceptual question, something that asks students to make sense of how music works. How do composers build and release tension through harmony, melody, and rhythm? That is the spine. The unit will spend most of its time on this. Students will listen to many pieces. They will analyze. They will compose their own progressions. They will refine their answer to that question over the 3 weeks. The debatable question, something that puts a position on the line. Is silence music? Or in a different framing, is the most powerful moment in a song the moment of resolution or the moment of withheld resolution? Either of those is debatable. Two reasonable students could disagree. The question gives the unit its weight. Now imagine the 3 sticky notes on the wall, like the teacher in Singapore. Yellow for the factual, green for the conceptual, pink for the debatable. The unit lives inside the 3. Every lesson references at least one. The final assessment requires students to engage all 3. That is what a complete unit looks like. The move that changes, a lesson tomorrow. If there is one move from this chapter you can use tomorrow, it is this. Take the next lesson you're going to teach. Look at the questions you have planned to ask. Count them. Most teachers will count 5 factual questions and 0 conceptual ones and 0 debatable ones. The standard. Pick one factual question and rewrite it as a conceptual one. Just one. Take a question like, what is photosynthesis? Rewrite it as, how does a leaf turn sunlight into the sandwich on my plate? Take a question like, what is a metaphor? Rewrite it as, why do humans almost never describe their feelings in literal language? Take a question like, what is the formula for the area of a circle? Rewrite it as, why does the area of a pizza grow so much faster than the radius when you order a larger size? Just rewriting one question changes the shape of the lesson. The classroom will spend 10 minutes longer on it. The conversation will go in unexpected directions. Students will say things they have never said before. You will notice that the room feels different, quieter, then noisier, then more focused. That is the change. One question. Now do it again next week, and again the week after. Within a term, every lesson you teach is going to have one of those questions in it. Within a year, your whole practice will have shifted. Honest acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge something. Writing good conceptual and debatable questions is hard, especially at first. You will write a question that you think is conceptual, and on inspection, it will turn out to be factual with extra words. That is normal. The most common trap is the question that sounds like a conceptual question but has a single right answer the teacher is waiting for. How do plants make food? Sounds conceptual but is really factual because the teacher is waiting for the answer photosynthesis. A real conceptual question would be, what does a plant have to do with the resources around it in order to keep itself alive? Now there are many defensible answers. The plant has to absorb light. The plant has to capture carbon dioxide. The plant has to draw water through its roots. The plant has to transport energy through its stem. The plant has to engage in chemistry. Any of these is a real start. Or another trap. You will write a debatable question that turns out not to be debatable. You will think, is climate change real? Is a debatable question. It is not. The scientific consensus is overwhelming. The question is factual. A real debatable question on the same topic would be, to what extent are wealthy nations obliged to compensate poorer nations for the historic harms of industrial emissions? That is debatable. Reasonable people disagree. So expect to revise your questions. Write a draft. Test it. Sharpen it. The sharper your questions are, the better your students will think. The discipline is the same as the discipline of writing a generalization. The first draft is rough. By the fifth draft, you have something real. A word for the listener who is tired. If you're listening to this chapter and feeling slightly overwhelmed, I want to say something gently. You do not have to do all of this tomorrow. You do not have to write 3 perfect questions for every lesson. You do not have to overhaul your unit plan tonight. Start with 1 question, just 1. The most important lesson of next week. Write a conceptual version of the central question. Replace the factual version on your plan. See what happens. If that one move went well, do it again next week. If it did not, that is fine too. Notice what felt clunky. Adjust, try again. This is a craft, not a checklist. Crafts are built slowly over years. The teachers who do this work most beautifully started exactly where you're starting. With 1 question, then 2, then a unit, then a year, then a way of being in the classroom. You have everything you need to begin. Begin small, begin honest, begin tomorrow. Something to do this week. Take your planner. Find the next lesson you will teach. Look at the questions you've written. Now, on a fresh page, write 3 questions about the same topic. 1 factual, 1 conceptual, 1 debatable. Use the color test if it helps. Yellow for factual, green for conceptual, pink for debatable. The factual one is easy. Just write any question that has a clean right answer. The conceptual one is harder. It must start with how or why. It must not have a single right answer. 2 thoughtful students must be able to give different defensible answers. The debatable one is the hardest. It must start with is, should, to what extent, or must. It must invite a position. Reasonable adults must be able to disagree about it. When you have all 3, look at them together. That is the architecture of a real concept-based lesson. Now put them on 3 sticky notes on the wall of your classroom where students can see them. Leave them there. Refer back to them. Let students live inside them for the unit. You've just changed how your room thinks. The recap and what comes next. Here is what we have said. A concept-based unit is built on 3 kinds of question. Factual questions which build vocabulary. Conceptual questions which build understanding. Debatable questions which build position. All 3 matter. Most units overuse the first and underuse the other 2. Adding even 1 conceptual question and 1 debatable question to a unit transforms what is possible in the classroom. This is the end of part 1. We have built the foundation. We know what concepts are. We know what generalizations are. We know what the 3 kinds of questions ask of our students. We know why 2 dimensions of teaching, facts and skills, are not enough. We know that the 3rd dimension, the concept, is what gives learning the power to travel. In part 2, we walk into the classroom together and run a concept-based inquiry lesson, phase by phase. Phase 1 begins with the most important 60 seconds of any inquiry. The provocation, the single image, the single object, the single moment that pulls students into a question they did not know they had. We meet it next.